Hello, this is Jackie Cohen, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Monday, August 3rd issue of the Democrat Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Homelessness rises by 13.1% in Monroe County. New York sees statewide decline of nearly 8%, data shows. New York's homeless population has grown in communities outside New York City, including a 13.1% increase in Rochester, Irondequoit, and Greece in Monroe County, despite a statewide decline, a new report from the New York State Comptroller's Office reveals. In the latest numbers from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's point-in-time count, which evaluates how many sheltered and unsheltered people are experiencing homelessness on a single night in January, the Empire State saw a nearly 8% decrease in its homeless population between 2024 and 2025. The drop is the largest of any state and follows a doubling of that percentage between 2022 and 2024, the Comptroller's Office says. However, the changes rely heavily on declines in New York City and isn't representative of what's happening in the rest of the state. And the share of unhoused children in New York is more than double the rest of the country. While the number of homeless declined, there's a lot of work left to do, State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli said. The problem is widespread, and it is not confined to major cities. In particular, the public, private, and nonprofit sectors need to work together to address the crisis of so many children experiencing homelessness in New York. Here's the latest. Where number increased. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, divides New York into 25 regions, or continuums of care. According to their data, the unhoused population has grown in 17 of these regions, with 11 of them seeing more than a 10% increase. Here's which regions have seen increases across the state between January 2024 and January 2025. Columbia and Greene counties, 58.9% increase. City of Troy/Rensselaer County, 55.2% increase. City of Schenectady/Schenectady County, 41.7% increase. City of Binghamton, Town of Union/Broome, Otsego, Chenango, Delaware, Cortland, and Tioga counties, 35% increase. Cities of Newburgh and Middletown/Orange County, 23% increase. Cities of Buffalo and Niagara Falls/Erie, Niagara, Orleans, Genesee, and Wyoming counties, 14.1% increase. Nassau and Suffolk counties, 13.4% increase. City of Rochester, towns of Irondequoit and Greece/Monroe County, 13.1% increase. Cities of Utica and Rome/Oneida and Madison counties, 12.2% increase. Cities of Yonkers and Mount Vernon/Westchester County, 7.4% increase. City of Poughkeepsie/Dutchess County, 5.8% increase. Franklin and Essex counties, 5.4% increase. City of Albany/Albany County, 4.5% increase. Cities of Glens Falls and Saratoga Springs/Saratoga, Washington, Warren, and Hamilton counties, 3.3% increase. Cities of Syracuse and Auburn/Onondaga, Oswego, and Cayuga counties, 2.8% increase. Systemic issues could be part of the reason why homelessness levels are increasing in parts of the state. A recent lawsuit claims New York is allegedly failing to provide enough money to prevent homelessness through its public assistance shelter allowance program, as median rents in the state have increased 85.6%, but none of New York's 62 counties have shelter allowances aligned with the respective county's HUD fair market rent rate. For example, in Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam counties, there's a more than $2,000 difference between how much the state provided a single household in 2025 and the federal shelter allowance. where number decreased. Here's which regions have seen decreases across the state between January 2024 and January 2025. Wayne, Ontario, Seneca, and Yates counties, 5.6% decrease. City of Kingston/Ulster County, 8.3% decrease. New York City, 10.3% decrease. City of Ithaca/Tompkins County, 13.3% decrease. Rockland County, 13.8% decrease. City of Elmira/Steuben, Allegheny, Livingston, Chemung, and Schuyler counties, 16.5% decrease. Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence counties, 18.5% decrease. New York health officials push back-to-school vaccines. Hesitancy grows while preventable diseases rise. As families prepare for the start of the 2026-27 school year, New York State's vaccination requirements for students should be a key part of their checklist before classes begin in early September. The state requires age-appropriate vaccinations to protect against several diseases, and students who do not meet the requirements or qualify for a medical exemption will be excluded from school until they comply, health officials said. Politically charged debates over school vaccinations have mounted since New York stopped allowing religious exemptions in 2019 after a measles outbreak in parts of Brooklyn and Rockland County. Recent federal vaccine policy changes under Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in 2026 have also drawn pushback from health officials in New York and other states. What school vaccinations are required in New York? New York requires students attending public, private, and parochial schools to receive immunizations based on the schedule recommended by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, a public health committee affiliated with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, state health officials said. The diseases protected against include diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, DTaP or Tdap, depending on age, polio, measles, mumps, and rubella, MMR, hepatitis B, varicella, chickenpox. Students entering certain grades also must receive additional vaccines against other diseases. For example, students entering 7th grade are required to receive 1 dose of the Tdap vaccine and 1 dose of the meningococcal conjugate vaccine. Students entering grades 8, 9, 10, and 11 must have 1 dose of meningococcal vaccine if they have not already received it. Students entering 12th grade generally must receive a 2nd dose of the meningococcal vaccine unless their first dose was administered at age 16 or older. The number of doses required for several vaccines varies on a student's age and grade level. Parents can review the complete immunization schedule through the New York State Department of Health at health.ny.gov before the school year begins. Why school vaccinations are back in the spotlight. New York school vaccination requirements have drawn renewed attention this summer following a record civil penalty against a former Long Island nurse practitioner accused of creating fraudulent vaccination records for hundreds of children. On July 9th, the State Department of Health announced a $544,000 civil penalty against Julie DeVuono, calling it the largest civil fine in the agency's history. State investigators found DeVuono fraudulently entered vaccination records into the state's immunization database for 162 school-aged children between 2021 and 2022, including children from the Hudson Valley, the agency noted. Families whose children received the fraudulent records were later required to provide legitimate proof of immunization before the students could return to school. Vaccines are the best protection against serious preventable diseases, and the New York State Department of Health has zero tolerance for those that misrepresent or falsify vaccination records, as these acts put lives in jeopardy, State Health Commissioner Dr. James McDonald said in a statement on the case. The enforcement action comes as public health officials nationwide warn of a resurgence in vaccine-preventable diseases. The United States has already surpassed last year's total number of measles cases. As of July 23, 2026, 2,318 confirmed measles cases were reported, the highest annual total in decades. Most cases have occurred among people who were unvaccinated or whose vaccination status was unknown. Earlier this year, Rockland County reported 3 cases of measles linked to international travelers. Declining protections have also been attributed to the growing anti-vaccine movement, which was bolstered by the confirmation of vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Health Secretary, USA Today reported. In addition to making anti-vaccine comments, Kennedy also downplayed pediatric deaths related to measles and touted false cures and preventives, such as the use of vitamin A. During the height of the 2025 outbreak, he somewhat pulled back from anti-vaccine messaging and encouraged inoculation against measles. Plummeting vaccination rates and the resulting resurgence in cases have put the United States at risk of losing its measles elimination status. Defined by the WHO as freedom from the continuous spread of a disease for at least a year, reaching elimination status has been called a historic public health achievement by the CDC. Are exemptions allowed? New York allows only medical exemptions from school vaccination requirements. Medical exemptions must be certified by a licensed physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant. The state eliminated non-medical religious exemptions in 2019 following the measles outbreak that sickened hundreds in Rockland County and parts of New York City. Students who do not meet immunization requirements or qualify for an approved medical exemption may be excluded from school until they comply with state law. Where can families find more information? The New York State Department of Health publishes the complete immunization requirements for school attendance, including the number of doses required by age and grade level. It also has an informational hotline at its Division of Vaccine Excellence, 518-473-4437. Parents should check the state's guidance before the first day of school and contact their child's healthcare provider or school district with questions about required vaccinations or immunization records. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Gates trash hauler on notice after complaints. Gates town officials have put waste management on notice after growing complaints about missed trash pickups. Town Supervisor Cosmo Ginta called on the refuse company to improve service by September 1st or risk losing its license to operate in town next year. Over the past several months, the town of Gates has received a substantial number of complaints from residents and business owners regarding missed refuse and recycling collections, delayed service, and challenges obtaining timely resolution of service-related issues, Ginta wrote in a July 29th letter to Waste Management. Waste Management did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Trash problems pile up in Rochester suburbs. The problems follow similar complaints and a lengthy public hearing about garbage collection in Irondequoit last year. Most local towns do not operate a municipal trash collection system, but officials are responsible for licensing private companies to provide waste management service within town limits. Andrea Wheatley said she was a 35-year customer of Waste Management until earlier this month. Over the last year, she noticed more frequent missed pickups of trash and recycling. Trying to get a hold of them is a nightmare, the Gates woman said. In May, she received another rate increase. She would owe $400 for the next 3 months of service. Wheatley said it was the tipping point in ending her long relationship with Waste Management. She switched to a local company, White Trash, for $397 for the first year. Getting Waste Management to retrieve their bins was another struggle. They rescheduled 2 times and eventually charged Wheatley $97 for the pickup. I was very glad to see that our supervisor sent them a letter, she said. Massawepie Scout Camp gets $1 million grant. State Senator Jeremy Cooney has secured a $1 million state grant for Massawepie Scout Camp as it prepares to celebrate its 75th anniversary next year, he announced July 29th. The 3,754-acre camp is located within the Adirondack State Park and is owned by the Seneca Waterways Council. Each year, Massawepie hosts more than 1,000 campers, about 90% of whom come from the greater Rochester region. Massawepie Scout Camp has provided summer camping for Scouts since 1952. At the camp, young people have opportunities to build connections, learn new skills, and participate in programs that include outdoor skills, handicrafts, ecology, and conservation and athletics. The funding announcement comes as the camp prepares for its 75th anniversary celebration next year, with events such as special summer programs, anniversary memorabilia, and alumni celebrations. Cooney is a proud Eagle Scout and said as a former Massawepie camper and staffer, he knows firsthand how transformative the experience can be for young men and women. From growing leadership skills to forming lifelong friendships, campers return a more confident, more independent version of themselves, Cooney said in a statement. This is exactly what young people need. I'm proud to secure this funding so the next generation of Rochester Scouts can enjoy the same opportunities. Jonathan Widmark, the Council's Scout executive and CEO, said the quality of a camp program depends in part on the systems working behind the scenes. He also described how the funding would be used. Our current dining hall has reached the limits of the number of campers it can effectively serve, making these improvements both necessary and timely, Widmark said in a statement. Modernizing the dining operation will provide the capacity and flexibility we need, improve the daily rhythm of camp, and allow us to keep the focus where it belongs, on delivering an outstanding experience for every Scout. Funding will also support improvements that enhance camp operations and ensure it can serve more young men and women for years to come. Dryden Film Series celebrates work of Hoffman and Anderson. Oscar-winning actor Philip Seymour Hoffman would have turned 59 on July 23rd. To mark that birthday, the Dryden Theater at the George Eastman Museum, 900 East Avenue, is presenting a film series celebrating the Fairport natives' work with writer/director Paul Thomas Anderson. All 5 movies in the Paul and Phil series will be shown in 35mm. Hard 8, 1996, at 7:30 p.m. August 5th. Hoffman plays an obnoxious, unnamed craps player. Punch Drunk Love, 2002, at 7:30 p.m. August 6th. Hoffman portrays Dean Trumbull, a mattress store owner/phone sex line manager. The Master, 2012, at 7:30 p.m. August 7th. Hoffman was nominated for an Oscar for his performance as Lancaster Dodd, leader of a philosophical movement known as The Cause. Boogie Nights, 1997, at 2 p.m. August 8th. Hoffman's portrayal of insecure adult film soundman Scotty J is widely regarded as his breakthrough role. Magnolia, 1999, at 7:30 p.m. August 8th. Hoffman plays hospice nurse Phil Parma. Tickets, $5 to $13, are available on the museum's website, eastman.org, or at the Dryden Theater box office up to 45 minutes prior to each film. Village Fair reopening delayed in East Rochester. The new owner of indie grocery store The Village Fair, 119 West Commercial Street, East Rochester, was shooting for a July 15th opening. When we stopped by July 30th, the windows were papered over. But the project to bring back the beloved community staple is still moving forward. Joe Tuminelli, who owns the building and is leasing the store space to Yeha Ali, said Ali is now aiming for a September 1st opening as he awaits a liquor license from New York State. Village Fair history. The Village Fair was founded in 1960 by Paul Constantini. Covering just 3,500 square feet and originally set up with 4 aisles, it evoked the mom-and-pop grocery stores of yesteryear. After Constantini's death in 2011, his family took over the business, but in 2020 sold it to ER Convenience. 2 years later, the store went dark after an electrical fire. In March, with the fire damage repaired, ER Convenience sold 119 West Commercial Street to Tuminelli's J2 Properties Rock LLC, which got people talking about a Village Fair comeback. Since Ali committed to restarting the store, the property has gotten a new roof and the store's vintage coolers have been refurbished. Tuminelli said, "The building also contains 6 apartments that have gotten upgrades. Planned store hours are 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. We will continue to provide updates as more information becomes available." U.S. to make Visa bond program permanent. The U.S. State Department will make permanent a Visa bond program that could require applicants from 50 countries, mostly in Africa, to post bonds of up to $20,000 when seeking U.S. visas, according to a federal notice posted online on July 31st. The Federal Register notice applies to B1 and B2 visas, which are issued for business and tourism travel. Consular officers may require covered non-immigrant visa applications to post a bond of up to $20,000 as a condition of visa issuance, as determined by the consular officers, the notice said. The 2025 Visa Bond Pilot, which provided a framework for the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of the Treasury to assess the feasibility of administering a Visa bond program, has provided sufficient data to suggest that a Visa bond program is an effective tool for enforcing compliance among bonded visa holders. In the pilot program, consular officers could require bonds of $5,000, $10,000, or up to $15,000. The final rule eliminates the $5,000 option and raises the maximum bond to $20,000. The final rule goes into effect on August 3rd, when it is scheduled for publication in the Federal Register. In the list of 50 countries for whose citizens this program applies, 30 are from Africa. U.S. officials say the policy is intended to reduce visa overstays. Immigration advocates argue it will deter legitimate travel to the United States. Rights advocates say President Donald Trump's aggressive immigration crackdown violates free speech and due process while creating an unsafe environment for ethnic minorities and encouraging racial profiling. Trump has defended the measures as necessary to bolster national security. While Trump says he wants to curb illegal immigration, his administration has made legal immigration more difficult. For example, by imposing new and expensive fees for applicants of certain visas and by enforcing social media vetting for applicants and immigrants already in the country. Tariff provisions could sink Russia sanctions. Bill would set precedent for secondary duties. A Russia sanctions bill championed by the late Senator Lindsey Graham faces a tough road in Congress as Democrats and some Republicans raise concerns about new trade powers the legislation would grant President Donald Trump. Many Democrats, some Republicans, and industry trade groups are unhappy about a provision in the long-stalled bill that would let Trump impose steep tariffs on countries that purchase large amounts of Russian oil and gas, or countries that his administration deems to be facilitating sanctions evasion. The bill would impose sanctions on Russian officials and authorize 100% tariffs on the 5 largest importers of Russian crude oil or gas, or the 5 top countries that help Moscow evade U.S. sanctions and keep funding its war against Ukraine, now in its 5th year. Those countries are not mentioned in the bill, but would likely include China, India, and potentially some European countries and Japan. Graham, who died suddenly in July, pressed for the bill's passage for over a year, but only in the past weeks secured support from Trump as the Republican president grew more confident in Ukraine and more frustrated with Moscow. The tariff provisions became more important to the White House after the U.S. Supreme Court in February struck down Trump's reciprocal tariffs of 10% to 50% imposed last year, which sent the administration scrambling to find new authorities. The sanctions bill would also allow the president to waive the Russia sanctions for unspecified national security reasons, a provision that pro-Ukraine Democrats oppose, given Trump's shifting views on Russia and Ukraine. The bill would also extend for 5 years Iran energy and weapons sanctions first enacted in 1996 that are due to expire this year, a measure added as a condition of Trump's support. Trump last week demanded that the bill also include tariffs on Iran, although trade between the U.S. and Iran is virtually nil. With polls showing that Democrats could win control of the House and possibly the Senate in November's midterm elections, some lawmakers say they would prefer to wait to pass Russia sanctions until Democrats have more influence over what many see as unprecedented legislation. The legislation advanced with overwhelming bipartisan support for procedural votes in the U.S. Senate on July 28th and 29th, with lawmakers calling it a tribute to Graham. Congressional aides said it could well pass the full Senate before senators head home to their districts this week. But the legislation, renamed in Graham's honor, faces bigger challenges in the House of Representatives, which is in recess until August 31st. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Already, some senior Democrats have lined up to oppose the sanctions bill. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and Representative Richard Neal of Massachusetts, the top Democrats on the respective Senate and House trade committees, have blasted the bill for granting Trump new tariff powers that they say could fuel U.S. inflation. There is no question that the U.S. government must take stronger action against purchasers of Russian energy who are fueling the unjustifiable war against Ukraine, they said in a joint statement. But the latest draft of the Sanctioning Russia Act is a prescription for bedlam and higher tariffs. The legislation is also driving concern among some Republicans. Mayor Patel, a former Republican congressional aide, now with the Hogan Lovells Cadwallader law firm, said he doubted the legislation could pass the House this year, given the coming election season and lingering Republican skepticism about the breadth of Trump's tariffs thus far. Patel said many Republicans in Congress remained uneasy about Trump's previous sweeping tariffs, and some were actively lobbying for specific exemptions, such as the one recently granted that offers temporary relief for phosphate fertilizer from Morocco to avert a shortfall caused by the Iran war. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, the sole Republican to vote against the bill on July 28th, has said that he will offer an amendment to put limits on the tariffs that Trump could impose, and others may follow suit. Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Olha Stefanishenko, on July 30th, said Ukraine needs quick action before the coming winter. You know very well that tariffs are a partisan issue at this point, so we hope it will not distract everyone from the real intention with the law, she told an event hosted by the Christian Science Monitor. Beyond concerns that the bill could raise inflation at home, sanctions and tariff experts say it would give presidents a new ability to target countries through secondary tariffs instead of just sanctioning individuals and entities found to be aiding sanctions evasion. The bill calls for those authorities to expire in 5 years, but experts note that governments seldom yield back powers once held. The expanded tariff power could upend functioning multilateral cooperation, including the 40-plus nation U.S.-led coalition that imposed sanctions on Russia after its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, one Western diplomat said. Backers of the bill argue the sunset clause narrows the tariff language enough to hit Russian energy revenues without negative consequences. Jess Hoverson, a former U.S. government official and now chief economist at the developer platform Bank Column, said the bill, if passed, would create a kind of sledgehammer that could target entire bilateral economic relationships. Secondary tariffs, as designed in this bill, would function as a much blunter instrument that could apply across-the-board duties to all goods from a country based on its energy trade with Russia or its role in sanctions evasion, Hoverson said. Court asked to hear Let's Go Brandon case. School banned clothing with anti-Biden taunt. When 2 Michigan students wore Let's Go Brandon sweatshirts to middle school in 2022, they knew what the phrase, which had gone viral as a euphemism for a vulgar criticism of President Joe Biden, stood for. So did the school officials in the rural community of Howard City, who told the brothers to change clothes, citing rules prohibiting clothing with indecent messages. When the students and their mother sued, lower courts said their constitutional free speech rights were not violated. Now the family hopes the Supreme Court will take their case and rule that schools can't censor political messages that are not plainly profane or lewd. Staple of political discourse. Let's Go Brandon is not profane. It is not lewd. It is not a sexual double entendre, lawyers for the students wrote in their appeal. It is a staple of political discourse and debate over the last 4 years, used everywhere from the floor of Congress to television roundtables and the campaign trail. Critics of Biden adopted the slogan after a reporter mischaracterized a profane phrase hostile to Biden that was shouted by fans at a NASCAR race in 2021. The brothers suing Tri-County area schools in western Michigan received sweatshirts emblazoned with the phrase as a Christmas present from their mother. The students, then in 6th and 8th grades, and identified in the lawsuit only by their initials, said in court filings they wore the sweatshirts to school to silently express disapproval of President Biden. But the school's dress code prohibits messages that are lewd, indecent, vulgar, or profane. An appeals court ruled in 2025 that school officials had reasonably determined the message was vulgar based on its commonly understood meaning. Recent student speech cases. The Supreme Court has not shown an appetite in recent months for reviewing how schools are policing clothing with political messages. In June, the court rejected an appeal from a Michigan student who was not allowed to wear, for her school's Great Kindness Challenge, a hat featuring an image of an AR-style rifle and the phrase, "Come and take it." The court likewise passed up a chance in 2025 to decide whether a Massachusetts school erred by banning a T-shirt saying there are only 2 genders. Those cases turned on a landmark 1969 decision protecting students' First Amendment rights as long as the speech isn't too disruptive. The Let's Go Brandon lawsuit tests a 1986 ruling that schools can prohibit speech that conveys an obscene or vulgar message. In that case, the Supreme Court said a school could discipline a student who used an elaborate sexual metaphor when nominating a classmate for student office during a school assembly. That ruling put the thumb on the scale in favor of school administrators' judgment calls, according to the appeals court judges who backed Tri-County area schools in the dispute over the sweatshirts. And here the uncontroverted origin of the slogan shows a plainly vulgar meaning, wrote Judge John Nalbandian, who was appointed to the Cincinnati-based 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals by President Donald Trump. National inside joke. But Judge John K. Bush, who was also appointed by Trump, disagreed, saying his two colleagues who ruled for the school were being too deferential to administrators when it comes to political speech. Bush said "Let's Go Brandon" became a national inside joke, similar to how the Wendy's 1984 ad slogan, "Where's the beef?" was co-opted by Vice President Walter Mondale to suggest a political opponent, Gary Hart, lacked substance. "Let's Go Brandon" just cheekily expressed criticism of a president's leadership capabilities, Bush wrote in his dissent. He said it was up to the Supreme Court to ultimately clarify and ideally limit the court's 1986 ruling about suggestive speech at school. The justices could announce whether they will hear the case, which is backed by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, when they return from their summer recess. Where to draw the line? Lawyers for Tri-County area schools encouraged the justices not to reopen that can of worms, warning that trying to figure out where to draw the line becomes head-spinning. The number of lewd and vulgar code words is shockingly expansive and ever-changing, wrote Lisa Blatt, the experienced Supreme Court litigator the school hired to fight the appeal, showing how seriously it has taken the lawsuit. Blatt filed her filings with so many examples, more than 200, of the kinds of phrases that judges would have to rule on, that she apologized for the use of offensive language and images. Almost all lewd speech comes in sanitized code, innuendo, and double meaning, she wrote. Study: colon cancer tests are often used incorrectly. When at-home colorectal cancer tests hit the market years ago, they were seen as a more convenient but less precise alternative to a colonoscopy. But a new study led by a Rutgers University doctor shows that many people don't use the tests correctly. That has created a large gap in preventive care, and it has led to a rise in late-stage colorectal cancer cases among those not following directions. There can be real life and death consequences, said Dr. Ethan Helm, a physician, researcher, and vice chancellor at Rutgers who oversaw the project. The study focuses on the fecal immunochemical test, or FIT, a widely available over-the-counter screening tool that has been used by millions looking for a cheaper and less invasive way to detect cancer. Because the test detects only blood and no other indicators, such as precancerous polyps, it is seen as a less comprehensive screening tool that requires yearly follow-ups. But almost half of about 493,000 patients in the Rutgers study failed to take the FIT screening annually. It's not a one-and-done test, Helm said. You can't say, "Whew, I'm negative," and think you don't need to bother with this anymore. About 54% of patients in the study completed the screening every year, 30% did it inconsistently every few years, and 16% took it once and never again. Consequently, advanced stage colorectal cancer was more frequent among the study's never repeaters, 19%, compared with 12% for those who screened inconsistently and 12% for annual screeners. The issue has come to the forefront with recent deaths due to colorectal cancer of actors who were in their 40s. Chadwick Boseman, who was 43 when he died in 2020, and James Van Der Beek, who died in February at 48. The recommended age to get a first colonoscopy for those with a low risk for colon cancer dropped to 45 from 50 in recent years. FIT kits can be found at most pharmacies, where costs run from $20 to $80. One of the popular at-home tests, Cologuard, which detects DNA in stool, was not part of the study, which was funded by the National Cancer Institute. Cologuard is recommended to be used every 3 years after a negative result. Colonoscopies are to be performed every 10 years after a negative test. A colonoscopy, a procedure in which a tube equipped with a camera is inserted in the rectum and biopsies can be taken, is still considered the most comprehensive way to detect cancer, especially precancerous polyps that may line the colon. Although it is a standard procedure, it is shunned by a large portion of patients. Preparation includes fasting from solid foods 24 hours before the procedure while taking a laxative to empty the colon. This has led a large percentage of those considered at low to average risk to seek alternatives such as FIT kits. There are a lot of people who don't want to take a colonoscopy, Helm said. So what's the alternative? The worst is to do nothing. As we say in the medical field, the best test is the test that gets done. Accusers. Blanche meeting was combative. Women asked acting AG if he'd read Epstein files. When a group of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers found out that they could finally meet with acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, they hatched a plan. They prepared for a tense but businesslike meeting where they'd ask the Justice Department to pursue new leads on Epstein's associates and confront the government on disclosing their identities when it published batches of investigative files. What we were met with was, when I recall it in my brain, jaw-dropping to me, said Liz Stein, a 53-year-old human trafficking specialist from Philadelphia, who says Epstein abused her. We walked out of there feeling emotionally exhausted and really dehumanized. In exclusive interviews with USA Today, 3 of the women in the meeting said Blanche, President Donald Trump's nominee for Attorney General, was combative and dismissive. And after they pressed him about whether he was familiar with the documents the Justice Department released, they all came to the same conclusion. Blanche hadn't read the Epstein files. The women's comments come as Blanche's nomination hangs in the balance due to unrelated concerns about him. Senators Tom Tillis of North Carolina and John Cornyn of Texas, 2 state Judiciary Committee Republicans, have stalled his nomination as they fight with Trump over the terms of a controversial settlement deal with the IRS. Tillis told Blanche on July 16th that he would only vote to confirm him if Blanche met with Epstein's accusers, a request that came minutes after Danny Bensky testified that she and other Epstein survivors had been trying fruitlessly for a face-to-face with him. The DOJ announced the meeting the same day. USA Today reached out to the Justice Department multiple times regarding details of the July 16th meeting. The department referred USA Today to a statement by Alessandra Serrano, the trafficking and child exploitation coordinator. Serrano said Blanche attempted to address all of the women's questions and added that the Justice Department is determined to bring justice for all victims of human trafficking and sex crimes. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Like a defense attorney. Bensky, a teacher from Hawaii, said the day she met with Blanche, July 16th, was already intense because she also testified against him at his confirmation hearing. She said someone from the Justice Department first offered her a staff meeting. Later, she said they offered a meeting with Blanche. She said she and a handful of other Epstein accusers who live in the United States attended. So did family members of the late Virginia Roberts Giuffre, the most outspoken and well-known Epstein survivor. She said Blanche brought Serrano, other staffers, and another man from the FBI. She also said the women's lawyers joined via a video call. Bensky said Blanche responded to the women's questions with defensive, semantic arguments and did not commit to investigating any of the leads they provided about Epstein associates. She said the tone of the meeting came across as Blanche asking the women to get to their point. I feel like he was acting like a defense attorney, Bensky said of Blanche, who previously served as Trump's personal lawyer in multiple criminal cases. That is at the core of what survivors have been feeling, is that he will always protect his own and the administration's reputational harm. Serrano said in a statement that Blanche was direct with survivors about how the criminal investigation process works and what was required to build and pursue a criminal case, including meeting with an FBI agent. Serrano said there were FBI agents in the room ready to follow up with them on their cases, and every survivor in attendance was given direct contact information for a senior DOJ leader. Laura Bloom McGee, 47, of Arkansas, another accuser who was in the room, said the women had already gone to the FBI to report Epstein's conduct. She referenced Maria Farmer's 1996 complaint to the FBI, alleging that Epstein moved child sexual abuse material from Ohio to New York. She said Blanche effectively disregarded what they had already done. He told us to go back to the FBI and start all over again, McGee said. Has Blanche read the files? Both Bensky and McGee described an exchange in which members of the group asked Blanche whether he had read the Epstein files. They both interpreted his answers to indicate he had never read any of the documents the department he runs has published in an online database. In his former post as Deputy Attorney General, Blanche oversaw the release of more than 3 million files under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Some of the women who say naked pictures of them were released in the documents have gone to court to get those records taken down. Bensky said when the group first asked Blanche whether he had read the Epstein files, he basically put it back on us, referencing the massive volume of files and implying it was too extensive to read in full. We then asked, "Have you read any of them?" She said Blanche didn't give a clear response, but instead pivoted. She said their questions gave him the opportunity to say he had read some of the files or searched through them. USA Today asked a press representative whether Blanche had read the files and did not receive an immediate response to that or a follow-up inquiry. The right side of history. The women in the group say they are universally opposed to Blanche being confirmed as Attorney General. If all Democrats on the Judiciary Committee vote no and 2 Republicans join them, his nomination could be doomed. If his nomination makes it to the Senate floor and all Democrats vote against the nomination, a handful of Republican senators could block his nomination. That's what Epstein's accusers are hoping for, but it's not clear yet whether the vote would happen before 2027. Trump is going to be Trump and do what he feels like has to be done, but I do believe that the Republican Party will have some courage, McGee said. We've been meeting with parties on both sides, and they're going to stand on the right side of history. Stein said the accusers may request another meeting with the Justice Department because she wants to remain open to working with the department in good faith. But she said she wouldn't participate in any performative meetings. Just because Todd Blanche doesn't want to work with us, I'm sorry, but that's not going to stop us, she said. Ex-Buffalo Bills corner Jackson retires at age 29. Former Buffalo Bills cornerback Dane Jackson has retired from the NFL after 6 seasons. The Jacksonville Jaguars placed Jackson on the reserve/retired list July 28th, bringing to an end the career of a 7th-round draft pick who appeared in 55 regular season games across 2 stints with Buffalo. Jackson, 29, was selected by the Bills in the 7th round of the 2020 NFL Draft out of Pittsburgh and developed into one of the team's top depth pieces in the secondary. He spent 5 of his 6 seasons in Buffalo, recording 155 tackles, 3 interceptions, 28 passes defended, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovery while making 28 starts. His best season came in 2022 when he elevated into a full-time starting role and became the team's top cornerback with Tre'Davious White recovering from injury. Jackson started 14 games for a Bills team that won the AFC East title, finishing with 57 tackles, 2 interceptions, 12 passes defended, and a forced fumble. After spending the 2024 season with the Carolina Panthers, Jackson returned to Buffalo on a 1-year contract in 2025. He was released during final roster cuts, re-signed to the practice squad the following day, and spent most of the season there before being promoted to the active roster in the playoffs. Jackson appeared in 3 regular season games and was active for both of Buffalo's playoff games. His final defensive snap with the Bills came in the AFC divisional round against the Denver Broncos after Tre'Davious White left with an injury in the 4th quarter. On the next play, Broncos quarterback Bo Nix went at Jackson, connecting with wide receiver Marvin Mims for a go-ahead 26-yard touchdown with 55 seconds remaining in regulation. "It's man-to-man coverage. I've got to win," Jackson said after the game. "Mims pretty much ran a double move. I've just got to win. I've got to make a play. I mean, pretty much that simple from my standpoint." Buffalo released Jackson in March ahead of free agency. He signed with Jacksonville in June, but decided to retire the day veterans reported to Jaguars training camp. Players placed on the reserve/retired list remain under contract with their current team, but are removed from the active roster. If Jackson were to return to the NFL, Jacksonville would retain his rights unless it released or traded them. Jackson finishes his career with 178 tackles, 30 passes defended, 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovery in 64 regular season games over 6 NFL seasons. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, August 3rd issue of the Democrat and Chronicle. Your reader has been Jackie Cohen. Thank you for listening.